tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear.
Okay, so where does one even begin? The good news is, if you're watching this video, I probably have 3 to 4 videos recorded, because I told myself I'm not gonna show my face on this channel again, and so like I have like a few videos already lined up to start with. And so if you're watching this, it means that has happened. 3 or 4 videos are now already done, and they're just gonna be rolled out. 1 video every 14 days. I don't think I can ever go back to once a week, but I have a long list of things I've already am passionate about and want to talk about on this channel. First of all, let me not be rude. I hope that you've entered the new year well. It's been an eventful absence. A lot has happened, but to be honest, I've never really gone. I'm just gone on this channel. Like, I always post a bit more frequently on my other channel, May in Bloom, and I used to say that you can also follow me on Instagram for more updates, but my Instagram enthusiasm, especially with the way things have changed over the years, and also me growing, I don't know, I'm like, you can see me where you see me. If you're new here, welcome to Avantu May. The biggest theme of this channel is we talk about decolonization, we talk about sovereignty, we talk about Black consciousness, and we talk about just living your best free life and causing no harm but taking no shit kind of vibes. I am Ugandan, I grew up in Denmark, I live a bit of everywhere in the world right now. I as a person also have to grow and experience and evolve. And then my way of thinking about the world also changes, and then I'm also able to share from those spaces when I come here and talk to you guys. So I feel like I have been away enough to collect and change and grow in my thinking enough where I feel like the things I want to share, I find them interesting enough, right? I had my period of really being in decolonization, but I think I also needed a time to practice what I had learned and what I was sharing, to have it more integrated in me, where now I don't even think about it as that. It's just how I am and how I live through the world. I have now started to explore other spaces that are just as fresh and exciting and interesting, that I think that maybe people who have seen my other videos will also enjoy. The subject I want to talk about today is actually inspired by a few things. 2 movies I've already watched, which were Woman King and Wakanda Forever, and especially because these are movies I've been looking forward to see for a while. So when they came out, I was excited, I was here for it, everything. Avatar, which was this 3rd movie I was really excited about seeing. This only makes sense if you watch the movies, by the way. I don't go to the cinema often, but these 3 movies were like a clear must. Like, I was like, I need to see these movies. And then I was randomly scrolling through Instagram where there was a call to basically boycott Avatar, because there is a lot of indigenous people that feel most of the inspiration is a mixture of different native and indigenous cultures and experiences, but they don't use that as an opportunity for representation. But also the director James Cameron and his vision of this movie and what it was supposed to present. I have the text here. So James Cameron's anti-indigenous statement on the Lakota people, basically. He says, I felt like I was 130 years back in time, watching what the Lakota soul might have been saying at a point when they were being pushed and they were being killed and they were being asked to be displaced, I think that's what it's supposed to say, and they were being given some form of compensation. This was a driving force for me in the writing of Avatar. I couldn't help but think that if they, the Lakota Sioux, had had a time window and they could see the future, and they could see their kids committing suicide at the highest suicide rates in the nation because they were hopeless and they were dead in society, which is what is happening now. And this is the problematic part. They would have fought a lot harder. The privilege of not recognizing the fact that for a lot of indigenous people all around the world, when they met the disease that is colonization, right? They could not have imagined the wrath, the greed, the savageness that colonizers were willing to do for their own benefit. because they had never seen anything alike. We never came from the same worldview. That's also why in a lot of stories of colonizers landing on countries that were planning to colonize, they were welcomed, they were well received, they were fed, everything, because they didn't know what they had in store. They didn't know what they were planning to do to people. It's kind of like when you start dating someone who is mentally sick, like manipulative, abusive, all of that. When they meet you, they're not gonna tell you, so yeah, once you start dating me, I'm gonna start gaslighting you by the second week. I think around the third week, I'm gonna go into slapping you a bit around, you know, like calling you names that make you feel inferior and damage your self-esteem. And I think I'm really gonna kick it up in around the year mark. Like, it's insane. Only an abuser will say shit like that and never think what happened to make people want to do that to other people. There is a way that we've been taught, which is also part of sustaining an oppressed people, that ensures that the oppressor is not held to the same moral ground as the oppressed, right? In this area, you can also add terms as, I'll write it here, culture. And rape culture is very based in the whole notion of boys will be boys. You know how men are, in the sense that don't expect men to be better humans. You as a woman have to constantly be on the higher moral ground in order to make sure that these people, this group of people in society who can't control themselves, who are savages by nature, will not cause you harm. But the more you do that, and the more you don't hold half of the population to account for their actions and put the blame on them, the more they go on being what they are.
I have a thing about feminine rage, which people think, for some reason, and this is with no disrespect to any writer, I get a lot of like men doing really terrible things and women sitting silently whilst like one tear like slowly falls. And I'm like, oh no, we get mad and angry. And I remembered like pulling Mark aside and saying, I'm really sorry, but the only way to play this truthfully is for me to like attack him. And
from a young age, especially if you come from the dynamic of the oppressed, you are always going to do your very best to be morally superior than your oppressor, because your oppressor reserves the right to be careless, to be unfair, to be savage, to be all of those things. But because they have the power of violence on their side, and you know they could destroy you, you will do everything you can to compensate for their lack of compassion and humanity. Right? This dynamic is seen even in a single unit dynamic of abuse, for example, in domestic abuse, right? You will see that the person who's being abused is the one who's going to be so hyper aware of the abuser, what they like, what they don't like, how you should talk, how you should dress, when to talk to them, when not to talk to them, to apologize first, to take the blame first, to always be 5 steps ahead. The person who's abused does this in effort to lessen the abuse and to create a sense of safety and control by making sure they over control themselves, because they know the person they're with cannot control themselves at all. But for me, as somebody who also grew up in a house with domestic abuse, these kinds of dynamics were much more reality to me at a young age, and I saw these patterns in other parts of society, of relationships and power dynamics. And one thing I also always say, the world is not that complicated, but we've made sure that it looks so complicated that people are so confused they won't see the simplicity or the patterns that you can see in one area that are just repeated differently on a bigger scale in other areas, right? We have all these fancy names for things like that separate everything and make you think that everything is so big and confusing. The more I learn, the more I study, the more I explore, the more I recognize it's not that complicated. It's same things that keep repeating with different names and different consequences on different scales, right? This way of being, this dynamic of being, which can be found in a domestic abuse situation, is also similar to what you will find in any hierarchy that consists of abused and abuser, or the oppressor and the oppressed. So this is also similar to when you see in very patriarchal religious communities where women are expected to be the ones who hold the moral ground above men, right? And at the same time, they're also being told that they're the most sinful, they are the most temptress, they are the sisters of the evil, basically. They're expected to prove their purity and good doing, and they're constantly put in a space of reactionary of the insanity that is their oppressors. So you are constantly trying to prove that you are good enough, you are pure enough, you are modest enough, you are proper enough, but it's never enough, because the more you try to prove, you kind of validate the insanity that the oppressor has and has placed upon you to regulate their own worldview. So you can't even live your own life because you are busy trying to make sure that the life that you live in the head of someone who's corrupt spiritually, mentally, and emotionally is the way that you see yourself or want to see yourself.
But it was also important to point out that for such a long time, Indigenous and people of color have been discouraged from getting any ideas of retaliation or using violence to liberate themselves or free themselves from unending oppression, from colonization and imperialism. So this idea of making sure that people maybe fought harder is not really fair without taking in consideration the fact that for centuries during the annihilation of Indigenous people's way of living, but also the enslavement of Black people and the oppression of Black people mentally and spiritually and emotionally, a very important component in all of that was making sure that they never retaliated, making sure that any mean that they might have to encourage other people of color to either defend themselves or kill their oppressors, people that were killing them, people that were enslaving them, people that were torturing them, was met with even more violence. And that is also quite similar in domestic abuse situation, where any form of setting a boundary or trying to stop the abuse is then revenged with even more violence to make sure that you never, ever, ever get any ideas of trying to free yourself. This is a psychological tactic as well, because you're ensuring that the person feels helpless and unable to save themselves. So this is also something that I think a lot of people are not quite aware of or even sensitive to when they talk about in which ways that people of color, Indigenous people, could have fought against colonization and imperialism and the destruction of their worldview and way of life.
This is also why growing up, we were always encouraged to look up to figures as Martin Luther King and Gandhi and what have you. Even though these people also experienced opposition and were fought against by oppressive systems, in the aftermath, to pretend that progress was being made, they were also used as the poster child for all oppressed people in how to face their oppressors. The majority of information we got growing up as children of oppressed people has always been how to be as respectful, as delightful, as unintimidating an oppressed person as possible. What this really made me think of was really very much about the ways in which it's so important for people of color, which I think goes back to the first movie I watched, Woman King, to see movies in which their oppressors are being killed or harmed, and where there is a clear visualization of our ancestors, the way they did fight back. In the Woman King, where you got those scenes at the end, spoiler alert, I don't know, where they start burning shit down, where they start killing colonizers and slave purchasers, all of these people. That is so important to witness, even in the cinema. Funny enough, we were in a cinema with mixed people, and even some white people were cheering that, and they're like, yes.
And what I mean by that is, I think it's important for everybody involved, if we are to build healthier ways of coexisting between the races, power structures. We need to see the balancing out of injustices without feeling like we are limited to the morality given to us by those who benefit from docile and friendlier victim props. I think it's a very, very necessary imagery and visualization because it liberates us from those mental chains that told us that we are forced to endure so much harm and injustice and are supposed to only do what our oppressors feel comfortable with us doing. That these were very organized and structured and systematic attacks on a people, holistic attack on a people. That's why I always say that decolonization will never be able to fulfill its mission unless it's also holistic, which means like decolonizing the mind, the body, the purpose of life, the way we live, the way we think. It has to be holistic because that's how we were infected. That's how we were destroyed. It wasn't just, we're going to take your land. No, we're going to control your religion, your spirituality, your relationships, your family dynamics. We're going to control the purpose of life. We're going to control nature. We're going to control every element that keeps you alive, that gives you meaning, and we're going to make sure that even your freedom never looks like you, but it looks like us. And you're going to think you're free, but you're going to be adding to our systems, adding to our worldviews, adding to our values, adding to everything that matters for us, and you're going to fight to be a part of it. Imagine, right? And another part of this that I would like to bring forth is the fact that what I have come to believe and what other people also talk about is that there is like man's law and then there is nature's law.
The laws of nature are very different from the laws of man. While the laws of man seek to order and control individual and social behavior so as to make communal life less risky, the laws of nature are deduced from long-term observation of repeatable patterns and trends. While the laws of men may vary from culture to culture, based as they are on moral values that lack universal standards, the laws of nature aim at universality, at uncovering behaviors that are true, in the sense of being verifiable across time and space.
What we think of justice is not what nature thinks is justice. I feel like nature has simpler principles and guidance than we as people created. And by we, I shouldn't even add myself, because the people who created the majority of laws that we live under don't look like me. So the laws some people have created. So basically this dynamic just ensures that you are the best prey you can be for your predators, because the rules are always created by the predator, and no predator can ever help you become less of a prey. It's like impossible, right? And I say predator and prey because, again, I say that nature's laws are consistent. So sometimes when I don't understand human laws, I always revert back to nature's law, and there you see a lot of things that we do, but we have been so removed from the simplicity of what's happening. But the complication of life and the meaning of life and justice, and even what justice looks like, has made it so most people have also been corrupted and colonized mentally. They think they're being moral and better people, but they're actually just making sure that their oppression never ends. Hear me out. By the way, I wanted to make a whole series literally called Hear Me Out, because I have some maybe not so popular ideas about certain things, and I feel like I have more grounding now to share them. I'm not sure how people receive them, but I know I'm not the only one who thinks like this. I feel intuitively, as a highly sensitive person as well, that the world is moving towards where we are ready and open to a different way of seeing our issues and problems. And one of those areas where we can peek through a new dimension of approaching what justice might look like, or what liberation might look like, you also have to start by daring to think differently and daring to think beyond even the realm that we were taught to think in. And I think that's also a great practice that I think is important for formerly colonized or oppressed people, that you will never be free if you're still trying to see the world from your oppressor's or predator's perspective.
In Wakanda Forever,
There is an exploration of the different ways those who have dealt or seen colonial trauma and destruction choose to respond and protect themselves. There is a contrast between how Niamo and the Talokan people respond to their trauma by going under the sea, but also by deciding that they will do anything in their means to make sure that their people never suffer at the hands of the greed of imperialism again. The Wakandans also protect and hide themselves and their most precious resource, but they also remain much friendlier, closer to their threat than the Talokan people. While the Wakandans choose a Western diplomatic model, the Talokan have absolutely no trust nor desire to collaborate with the global North.
Niamo kind of represent the justified rage of indigenous and brown people. They have that justified rage because of the merciless and savage destruction of their people, their culture, their heritage, and the continuous pressure to dismember them as beings and create robots that exist in a world that is foreign to them, to be slaves and agents for a worldview and a purpose of life that is not aligned with who they are or what they believed in, right? So Niamo in the movie kind of represent that, what I see as justified rage and anger. But this justified rage and anger is often denied from people of color. That's why, like I said, we were given Gandhi and Martin Luther King, but we were told clearly, at least when I was growing up, that what Malcolm X did was too much. He went too far. Not because he ever actually set up a real army to fight the government, which would have been justified. Now that I've grown in my adult mind, I'm like, that would be the bare minimum. We were told from the beginning to make sure that we knew of him, but he was the bad person. We needed to be more like Martin Luther King. We needed to ask, to pray, to sing, to hold hands. Right? This was also part of my decolonial experience, where I was decolonizing morality or duality of good and bad, and recognizing where did I learn this and why did I learn it this way? Who does it benefit for me to see things this way, and who does it not benefit? Even when we got handed religion was a very important part of colonization and the destruction of our people. And I know this is a very sensitive subject because even I have a lot of people who are still religious, and on a personal level, I'm very live and let live. Everybody has their own journey in life. But in my own opinion, I also see how religion was a very important aspect in colonizing people, because the most important part of religion was telling them how to be good people and how to get into heaven and how to suffer gracefully, because in heaven they could be redeemed. And you can see it even today in situations where Black Americans are, for example, being shot down by police. There was a lot of previously where you would see the family saying, we forgive you and we embrace you with love. Shit that white people would never say if something like that happened to them. And we are supposed to see this as, oh, look at us being noble and good. Noble and good is good when it's towards people who actually also see you deserving of that kind of respect back. But in a situation where you've been told and proven to over and over again, all you're doing is being a good victim. There is no honor in being a good victim, a likable victim, a pleasant victim. It makes absolutely no sense, but it does make sense if you are holding out for the big payment, which in religion is getting to heaven. This is not something we naturally gravitated to. A lot of indigenous people, these verses, this worldview was pushed down their throat, not at the same level as they were pushed down the throats of the colonizers. Or even when you see how religion was brought into Europe itself, right? Christianity, these were not the same things that were forced down their throat. What we got, even though it was the same book, what we got indoctrinated with was to make sure that we would be and continue to be good little victims of oppression, and that we would want to be morally superior to the tactics of abuse that we were going to experience from those who abused us, because at the end of the day, they told us and made us believe that what happened here doesn't actually matter. Like, I know we're like oppressing you, whatever, and killing your children and so on, but remember like that story of Job where everybody dies but then God gives him more children, because you know children can be so easily interchangeable. Like, me dying is okay if my mom gets 2 more kids. Insane shit. By the way, back to Nemo. Nemo and his people are people who had been hit once and were never gonna forget. They were gonna make sure that this never happens again, and they have no mercy for anybody. You're either with us or against us, but this will never be repeated again. Wakandans are very much written in the way that I would think that most Africans are, or Black people are. So they protect this metal to make sure that it never gets in the hands of other in Western powers, because they've seen what they've done with the little they have, and they know they'll only use this as an opportunity to cause more destruction and more harm upon the world. So they decide to protect themselves. What I think was interesting in that is you still see that Wakanda has this space of respectability to it.
What I mean by respectability politics is that it seems as though the Wakandans are portrayed to be the more moderate, sensible way of responding to imperialism, where it's more about self-defense and protection, but it's not as radical as what Narmo and the Tolkien people's approach to self-protection and ensuring that what happened to them in the past does not happen again. I think the Wakandans, even though they take jabs at the concept of imperialism and colonialism, it's always in the safer realm. You know, it's not too radical, it's not too threatening, it's not too uncontrollable, if that is the right word. I feel like this in a way is an interesting portrayal, because it's not too far from what is ingrained within us to imagine as the limit of that protection, or even as the balancing of those injustices. I think that's just a very different and interesting contrast between the two, and also who we're supposed to think is the reasonable one in the way that they both respond to what was unprovoked imperialism and oppression and destruction of their people.
The Wakandans and the meeting of Nemo, I think, was a very important thing, but I hate that they did the same thing in this movie that they did in the first movie, where the focus was between Killmonger and Black Panther arguing with each other and fighting against each other, where there is this whole entity and system trying to get hold of vibranium so that they can use it to oppress on a bigger scale and do more damage and harm. And so I feel like Nemo and his people are a great reflection of, like, what does it look like to have experienced harm, abuse, have experienced the destruction of your people, and literally draw the line there. The only thing that Wakanda has in its favor is that they have an element, something that is able to create weapons that can protect them. Again, what I say, that your power and your safety is only in this relationship of the world that we're in, is only guaranteed if you have the violence to back it up. When you don't have the violence to back it up, you will never be free, you will never be allowed safety, you will never have any of those things unless at the mercy and the willy-nilliness of the people who grant it to you or allow it to you. That's why, even to tie another thing into this before I go, even with what is happening with women's rights being pulled backward, this is the same thing I talked about in previous videos. If we talk about equality, if we talk about asking to sit at tables, if we talk about being allowed better positions in systems of oppression, you must also know that what you beg for someone to give you and they give it to you is also validating that they have the power to give. And if you have the power to give, you have the power to take at any moment. Which means whether it's women's rights, gay rights, race rights, any of those rights, class rights, if you are begging for stuff, you are validating the system that holds that stuff, those rights, the right to give and take. And I think real empowerment is claiming liberty away from all of that. Do I have the know-hows of exactly how to do that? Not entirely. I'm practicing it more on a personal level by myself. But I think the biggest work we have to do is recognize it mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, and practice that on that level first. Because once you change your mind, which is another part, a good and important component in oppressing people, is that you make sure that you have installed a program in their mind that keeps them in check. It's kind of like what they do to elephants, and they make sure they're enchained so aggressively at a young age that when they're older, the chain that is around their ankle, they are now more powerful than it. They can free themselves from it, but mentally they're still enslaved. So they still believe that that little chain is able to restrain them. So by using that kind of psychology on people you want to enslave and oppress, from a young age, you program them that way. As grown up, you enforce it. You let them enforce that kind of thinking with each other. By doing that, you make sure that you never have to keep them enslaved physically because you've done such a good job at it mentally. So for me, even liberation, when I talk about a holistic decolonization, that's also what I mean. That we have to liberate ourselves mentally. We have to liberate ourselves and decolonize our vision of justice, of fairness, of fighting for our rights, of what a liberated world looks like for us, what our demands are, and recognizing what we are willing to do to achieve that. All these movies that like to tell the story of oppression, where they make sure that we just see, oh, how poorly oppressed the people were, are kind of just replaying that trauma for the sake of the trauma response we all connect to it as oppressed people. I want to see more portraying what also happened during those times, where people did fight, where people did use their best means to change the situation, but also where people were manipulated and they were fighting against things they could never imagine being used against them. They were fighting spiritual warfare, they were fighting emotional warfare, they were fighting a system that was so organized in the destruction and wearing down of a human being on all levels, so that they could be nothing but pawns in the schemes of deprived beings, basically. Anyway guys, that's my video. As you can see, I have a lot to share from so many perspectives, but I hope you guys will enjoy it. Seeing from this, I think it's going to be like long content you can drive around to, listen while you walk or do stuff, but some of them will be shorter. This one is long because, like I said, I had no template. I was just speaking. But I feel like I covered most of it in the best way I could together, right? It is what it is. And people are like, are you advocating for violence against violence? One eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. But you know what will happen if the whole world was blind? I bet you like violence would slow down. So guys, I'm sorry. I think I've gone a bit radical. As you can tell, I think remember to stay kind, but as always, take no shit. Be clear with your boundaries. Do not be a polite victim. Do not be a polite prey. And this is in no way victim blaming, but it's recognizing that you can never rationalize your way out of oppression. You can never campaign your way out of oppression. You can only recognize that you are going to reclaim your power and choose a way to guarantee that a boundary is set that can never be crossed again. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.
Baby, you give me